You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise and Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we're finally here. Today, the jury is scheduled to be selected in the double homicide case that all started 7 years ago when the bodies of 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German were found mutilated and posed near the historic Monon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana. Now, I would imagine almost everyone knows this case, but you might know it as the Down the Hill case, because for years, that was the small portion of a Snapchat video pulled from one of the girls' phones that gave the concerned citizens and distraught family members the only glimpse of who they believe killed the two teens. So let's go back to that day and set the scene. It was February 13th of 2017, and Libby and Abby had asked Libby's sister to drop them off at the Monon High Bridge Trail in this very small town of Delphi. There's just over 3,000 people. Now, during their walk, Libby had posted photos of their outing on Snapchat, and then all communication just stopped. Libby and Abby did not meet up with Libby's father at 3:15 like they had scheduled. As family became concerned, when they hadn't heard from or couldn't find either Libby or Abby, they began an initial search before calling the police. Unable to find the two teens, authorities were then alerted. The next day, around noon, Abby and Libby were found near the trail on private property, both of them having been killed by slashing wounds from a knife. Investigators did believe that a gun was also used at the scene. Since an unspent bullet, so that's one that hasn't been fired, well, that bullet was found near the victims' bodies. Libby's phone, which contained the most helpful clues to their murders, was found underneath her body. And the girls were missing some clothing, like there was a pair of underwear that wasn't there, and then a couple of socks. And Abby, she didn't have any blood on her clothes. And this would have been impossible since the killings were so brutal. Abby was also in the wrong sweatshirt. So these clues led investigators to believe that the girls had been redressed after they had been murdered. And in a court filing in September, we learned that the girls' necks were slashed and that their bodies had been posed in strange ways. Now, we're going to get to those strange ways in just a bit, but let's finish out the timeline. 2 days after the murder, Indiana State Police released a still image of a man they believed to have been seen on the bridge the afternoon that the girls were taken. Now, this white guy, he's got his hands in his pockets, his head is down, he's on the walking trail, and since the image was found on Libby's phone, they knew he was walking towards the girls. Well, a week later, law enforcement released an audio recording of a man's muffled voice saying, "Down the hill." Police also hinted they had additional information that they had gained from Libby's phone, but they wouldn't be releasing any of that information because they didn't want to compromise the investigation. Now, in a town of about 3,000, they couldn't find their guy. Finally, in July, a composite sketch created by the memories of various trail visitors on that murderous day, well, that sketch was released by law enforcement. And the families, law enforcement, they then hit a dead end for nearly 2 years. But then in April of 2019, Indiana State Police threw everyone a curveball. They announced that they would be heading in a, quote, new direction. They released a new composite sketch, much different than the first, and they begged the public to look at that sketch, to listen again and again to the audio, and watch how the man is walking in the very, very short Snapchat video. Investigators said they felt like the murderer was hiding in plain sight. That was kind of tipping their hand a little, with the indication that it's probably a local guy. Again, despite receiving tips, despite even looking strongly at a man who had completed suicide just months earlier, police still had no arrests and no answers for the families. It was fall of 2022. 5 years after Abby and Libby were slain, that Richard Allen was arrested and charged with their murders. Now, at the time of the murders, Richard Allen would have been 44 years old, and he was working as a pharmacy tech. He also didn't have a history. There was no criminal record. Weirdly, though, he did have an alias that he went by, and I can't really figure out what that was about, but we do know he wasn't the typical killer profile. But there was one thing authorities did have: proximity. And he did seem to have been at the Monon High Bridge on that February day. In fact, his home, which he shared with his wife and his adult daughter, it was less than a 5-minute drive from the bridge. Libby's grandparents were familiar with the unassuming man who had worked at the CVS pharmacy. They had even chatted with him as he processed some photos for them at the CVS store. That visit occurring after the murders, but obviously before Richard's arrest. When online sleuths began scouring the internet, they discovered that Richard's wife, Kathy, had posted a picture on Facebook in December of 2021. In that picture, Richard and Kathy are both smiling as they enjoy visiting a local bar in Delphi. It's pretty chilling when you discover that in the background on the wall is the 2019 police sketch of the potential murder suspect. And it's hotly debated if Richard looks like the first sketch. You can do your own comparison. I think there are some similarities, but he definitely doesn't look like the second sketch at all. Okay, how did authorities land on Richard Allen being their guy? Well, they had interviewed him clear back in 2017, years ago, much closer to the murders. So he had been and was still on their radar, at least for several years. And it was in that 2017 interview that Richard told authorities he was there on February 13th of 2017, the day the girls were killed. Now, he also denied that he was involved and that he had never seen those two girls before. Without anything concrete to hold Richard, he was placed on their suspect list and released. Then police interviewed him again in 2022, following a search of his home. In that search, authorities had connected the unspent bullet to the chamber of the Sig Sauer Model P226, which Richard owned, and which his wife said he was the only one who had access to that gun. Well, in that interview, Richard couldn't offer any explanation as to why the unspent bullet would have been near the girls' bodies. So please understand, everything I've told you up to this point is such a brief retelling of the story. I'm just trying to give you the pronounced details before the trial begins. Now, following the arrest of Richard, it's been nothing but chaos in this upcoming trial. We've had the judge remove the defense attorneys, citing gross negligence due to crime scene photos being leaked. Then we also had those defense attorneys filing an appeal against the ruling to the Indiana Supreme Court, and then they were reinstated as Richard's attorneys. Well, the case has also seen multiple delays due to evidence sharing and also a lack of time to prepare for the trial due to all the defense attorneys' on-again, off-again representations. But in the hearing this year, Indiana State Police Detective Brian Harshman testified that Richard Allen has confessed to the murders more than 60 times since his arrest. Now, most of those confessions, they were part of jailhouse phone calls to his wife or to his mother, and those all happened while he was housed at the Westville Correctional Facility. Well, that detective said in the review of the phone calls that Richard gives very specific details about the crime and that he has also revealed his alleged motivation for killing the two girls. So that's something we're going to learn in the trial. Now, in one of the confessions, Richard Allen allegedly said he used a box cutter to kill the girls. He then said he threw that box cutter in the dumpster at the CVS where he worked. Now, the defense has long argued that his confessions are part of a broken mind. They say he is a prisoner of war mentally, and that this shattered mind is confessing without really knowing or understanding what he's doing. All right, so that's your timeline leading up to today. So what's going to happen as the trial kicks off? Well, Judge Gull has said that she will allow the jury to hear all those various confessions. I would expect those tapes to be played in court. And what we most likely won't hear? Anything about Odinism. Now, this is one of the theories that the defense intended to use to show that their client did not commit these brutal murders. Basically, the defense team thinks the girls were sacrificed in a pagan ritual by neo-Nazis that belonged to this Odinism cult. So now we're back to the way the bodies were posed. The defense team believes that the bodies show possible Odinism signatures, that sticks and branches that were used in the posing of the bodies were supposedly in the shape of pagan symbols. And the defense attorney said they actually discovered 4 individuals that were involved in Odinism and that they are potential suspects for the murders of the girls. But not so fast. The judge banned the defense attorneys from bringing up the Odinism cult theory or the names of the nearly about dozen other suspects in court during Richard's trial. Now, Judge Gull issued the ruling stating that, quote, the burden is on the defense to show a nexus, and that nexus needed to be between the other suspects, Odinism, and the murders. Basically, remove Richard Allen from the whole thing. Judge Gull then went on to say that the defense had failed to produce admissible evidence demonstrating a nexus. However, the defense will still have a chance to convince the judge that there is a link between Odinism and other suspects, with the hope of presenting that argument to the jury. That will all happen during motions in the trial and will come about as evidence is presented. So the bottom line is, just because the ruling is in place right now doesn't mean we won't see Odinism talked about in a few weeks as this trial progresses. Now, another thing we might see in the trial. The defense team has asked that the jurors be taken to the scene of the murders. They want to present evidence about the terrain and the difficulties in getting 2 girls to this one spot. They believe visiting the area will greatly aid in the understanding of their evidence. Now, we might also see some fireworks between Judge Gull and the attorneys. Remember, I told you that the defense team had been accused of leaking crime scene photos. Well, the leak of the photos has been attributed to one of the defense attorney's friends. That man had worked at the law firm, but he had never worked on the Delphi case. At least that's what they're alleging. So once the investigation into that man began, and then into that man being the potential leak, well, that man went ahead and completed suicide. So we have all these raw feelings there, and we also have 2 varying stories about how the attorneys were initially removed from the case. The defense says they were coerced into quitting because they were ambushed by Judge Gull. She says no way, that she informed them of her intent and they chose to remove themselves from the case. Well, in return, the defense attorney said they wanted Judge Gill to recuse herself. And clearly that didn't happen because she started the case this morning. All right, what does that leave us with? Maybe the 2 sides are going to be able to manage their past grievances and move through the trial with no hiccups. But I will be watching for the tensions to possibly arise. Now, Judge Gull has said the trial should last about a month, and cameras will not be allowed in the courtroom, so don't expect any video footage. After the jury is selected over the next couple of days, they will be sequestered and moved about 95 miles away from Delphi. And if Richard is convicted, he could be sentenced to 90 to 130 years in prison. I will keep you updated as this trial progresses. And I have to talk about this Crumbl Cookie fiasco in Australia. And you're probably asking, which Crumbl Cookie fiasco? Because they've had a couple. We had the Utah Cookie War back in the summer of 2023, where the owners of Crumbl filed lawsuits against 2 competing cookie companies. The first company, called Dirty Dough, was accused of infringing on Crumbl's likeness and brand. Crumbl said the cookies were too similar in both expression and then in their look and feel. The suit also said that Dirty Dough's packaging was too similar to Crumbl's. So if you're not a Crumbl Cookie fan or you don't have one in your area, let me explain what it looks like. It's a long rectangular box, and they put 4 cookies next to each other, and they're big cookies. They put those 4 cookies next to each other in the box. Well, Crumbl felt like Dirty Dough was doing something very similar. For me, a box is a box, but whatever. They filed suit against them. Then Crumbl also filed a second suit. This one was against Crave Cookies. Crumbl felt that Crave had infringed on their trademark. Both of those suits were settled, but it left many in Utah feeling like maybe Crumbl was the Goliath beating up on anyone that threatened their lucrative baking bank account. And can I also add a little of my own opinion here? Isn't a cookie just a cookie? Some taste better than others, but it's still just a cookie. So that was their first fiasco. Here's the second. They had the fiasco of a federal investigation where the U.S. Department of Labor found violations at 11 of the company's franchises, and this all happened in 6 different states. So those states are California, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Utah, and Washington. Now, those violations ranged from allowing minor-aged employees to work longer and later hours than the law permits, and also to having them perform tasks they aren't really legally old enough to do. Kind of like maybe they shouldn't be operating potentially dangerous ovens or mixers or other machinery. Now, the violations affected 46 employees. Some of them were as young as age 14. And the Department of Labor imposed over $57,000 in penalties against the franchises where all of those violations took place. Okay, so that took place in 2022. The lawsuits against Dirty Dough and Crave were filed in 2023, and now it's 2024, and Crumbl is scrambling once again, kind of. This after an unauthorized pop-up Crumbl shop in North Bondi, Australia, left customers with stale cookies that cost them $12 more per cookie than what Americans pay. Okay, and you thought the $5 cookie prices were expensive. These ones were $17.50. All right, this pop-up event in North Bondi, well, it was organized, and pulled off by a group called Crumbl Sydney TikTok. And you can tell by their name, of course, they advertised the event on TikTok. In their bio on the social media app, the organizers say they are not endorsed by Crumbl, that they're just fans importing the scrumptious cookies. Now, this is kind of crazy, right? This is the only thing this TikTok account does. How did it gain enough traction that people showed up? Well, it did. The event drew a huge crowd and some very high-level emotions. After watching several TikTok videos of people rating the cookies that they bought in Australia, I'm going to share just this one with you.
Okay, so after waiting in line for 45 minutes, after waiting in line for 45 minutes, we got Crumbl Cookie. We only got 2 because one is $17.50. Interesting. Oh, it's breaking off. It's like breaking. It's like something I can make that. But rate this 7.6. Already at 9. It was fresh. So these are breaking apart. In terms of freshness, 0 out of 5. Just this. Twix. It's a 3 out of 10. Have 1 out of 10. Okay, anyways, we're all rating. I'd give mine at 8 out of 10. Was it worth waiting in line for 45 minutes? Maybe yes, because there's no Crumbl here, but no, because people were fighting and the cookies are $17. You should look at the wheel. It's like falling apart. Some girls asked us where the Crumbl Cookie is, and we told them, like, it's gone. Anyways, what's the moral of the story here? Crumbl Cookie isn't all that. Spend your $17 somewhere else. Okay, bye.
Now, if you aren't watching on YouTube, I have to tell you, these cookies look disastrous. The presentation is not just kind of bad, it's horrible. The icings are kind of melted, the cookies are misshaped, some of them are dented, and then the dryness of the cookies is evidence because the cookies are literally crumbling, which I guess you could say they warned you about in the name, right? But they're literally falling apart in their hands. Now, I've had fresh Crumbl cookies, and they don't look like that, and they don't fall apart in your hands. In fact, some people complain the cookie isn't baked enough. So it was just a weird representation of what Crumbl cookies really are. Well, you've got all of this. You got people complaining. Now let's turn to Crumbl Sydney TikTok. That page received so much backlash that they released a statement saying that the cookies weren't fresh since they had to be transported from the US, specifically from Hawaii. The organizers revealed that they spent $4,000 on flights and luggage, $6,000 on cookies and packaging, $2,000 in duties, taxes, and custom brokering, and then finally $1,000 in staffing. They claimed they purchased 840 cookies in the United States and transported them to Australia for this pop-up shop. And then in the statement, they also again reiterated they have no official involvement with Crumbl Cookies. Well, so what does Crumbl Cookie do? Their corporate has now addressed the issue by saying the following. While the pop-up in Australia was not sponsored by Crumbl, we love seeing excitement for Crumbl around the world. Currently, there are Crumbl locations in all 50 states in the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. Then the statement went on to read, We look forward to expanding to other countries in the future. Information about new international locations will be shared through our official Crumbl communication channels. So basically, don't go to this off-brand TikTok channel to get your information or to purchase our cookies. Now, the event organizers, they said it had nothing to do with the money, that the event was never really about profit. The organizers said they only aimed to make the cookies available for their fans. Well, doing the math with the amounts that the organizers said they spent to get the cookies to Australia and to staff the event at the gas station, it looks like they made a profit of about $1,500. That is if the numbers are accurate. And under Australian law, they can sell imported goods. They really did nothing wrong. They just can't represent themselves as the brand. So, in theory, no laws were broken, and Crumbl does not plan to take legal action. And by the way, the Crumbl Sydney TikTok page, it isn't going to bring you much if you go looking. All their videos are gone. And a quick update to a case I brought you back in September of 2023. This was a shocking one with the video footage shared online of then 17-year-old Jesusa Ilea and 16-year-old Yasmir Keys driving a stolen vehicle. They allegedly had went on an early morning crime spree that included burglary, a hit and run of a bicyclist, a crash into another car, and then the brutal images of Jesus honking his horn before plowing over 64-year-old cyclist Andreas Probst. Now, Andreas was a retired California police chief who was out getting his early morning exercise riding in the bike lane of a busy Vegas road. He died hours later at a local hospital. In the footage, you can see the car ram Andreas from behind, where he is thrown onto the windshield of the car and then flung to the side of the road. Yasmir can be heard saying, "Damn, that N-word got knocked out." In reply, Jesus says, "They have to get out of here." Well, when I first told you this story, it included claims by one of the teens as they were being arrested that they would be out of jail in 30 days because the juvenile court system in Nevada is so easy to game. Now, that's a very clean version of what Jesus was shown saying on police body cam footage, but you get the indication. I just cleaned it up for him. So what's the update? Well, last week, Judge Christy Craig ordered Jesus Ilea, who is now 19 years old, to Lakes Crossing Center, which is a maximum security psychiatric hospital located in Sparks, Nevada. According to court records, medical staff believe that Jesus has previous brain damage, and that may have affected the decision-making of Jesus, who was driving the stolen car. The visit to the psychiatric facility will help determine if Jesus is incompetent to stand trial. This means the trial for the two who had previously pleaded not guilty to a slew of charges, including attempted murder and murder, well, it's all going to be put on hold. That trial was supposed to be next month. Now, this hospital admittance also places on hold Jesus's other criminal charges, which include a not guilty plea for an attempted murder that occurred in a group stabbing attack in June of 2023. So it's not just the running over of Andreas that Jesus is facing. Now, the two, Jesus and Yasmir, they were charged as adults, but due to their ages, they can only be sentenced to prison, and they will not be eligible for the death penalty. If they are found guilty of murdering Andreas, they could receive a sentence of 20 years to life in a state prison. So, Jesus is on hold pending the competency ruling, and Yasmir will be seen in court on October 22nd. He can proceed with the trial on November 12th if the two sides and the judge agree to carry forward. From what I'm reading online, that doesn't sound like it will happen, but we'll just have to wait and see. I will be following this one, and I will let you know how the trial will proceed. And let's finish with a story out of Cripple Creek, Colorado, where one person is dead and 23 others were trapped when an elevator used for tours of the historic Millie Kathleen gold mine malfunctioned. Now, the 1-hour tour descends visitors 100 stories into the earth, where they can view gold veins in the rocks, or they can ride an underground locomotive, and they can see authentic mining equipment. And they also are kind of taken through a tour that shows them the evolution of mining throughout the decades. Now, this mine is located about 20 miles southwest of Colorado Springs, kind of near the base of Pikes Peak. Well, on Thursday, right about noon, the elevator malfunction trapped the mine employee and nearly 24 tourists 1,000 feet underground. Now, there are some conflicting reports here. I did read in some newspapers that at that point, the mine employee had already perished. But then in other newspapers, it seems that all 24 were still alive. But what we did learn, that after first responders were called and they developed an initial plan, half of the group, 11 tourists, were expected to ride a minecart through the shaft to safety. When they got to about 500 feet up or halfway through the rescue, the mine employee who had been injured by the elevator doors, well, his deceased body was recovered. So that's where we have a little bit of difference in the reporting. I'm not sure if the mine employee made it all the way down to 1,000 feet or if he was left at the 500 foot and the elevator dropped. They haven't clearly told us yet, but the recovery of the mine employee happened at about 500 feet below the ground. Now, there has been reporting that he absolutely died as a result of the machinery malfunctioning. Well, those 11 tourists, they were pulled to safety on the mine cart, and that left 12 people stuck in the mine on Thursday night, where temperatures hover at 50 degrees in the underground area. They did have water and blankets and a radio to communicate, but there are no restrooms located underground. Eventually, the first responders were able to rescue the other 12, bringing them up on an elevator 4 at a time. 2 children were part of the stranded group, and only 4 people received medical treatment for minor scrapes, which is such good news. Now, in a sad twist, this was the last weekend of operation before the tourist location would close for the season. Authorities later identified the mine worker as 46-year-old Patrick Weir. He was a local father of a 7-year-old child. His Facebook profile lists him as a former airman with the U.S. Air Force. His brother has started a GoFundMe to benefit Patrick's 7-year-old son. I was so touched to see that comment after comment from donors were from people that had visited the mine and had enjoyed having Patrick as their tour guide. They don't even have any other connection to this man, yet they have donated to his GoFundMe. He must have made a daily difference in his job. All right, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for being here. Thank you for liking and following and watching on YouTube, whichever way you get the podcast. Just a big thank you for just being a part of the Rise in Crime community. I always say it, I have the best listeners. If you haven't yet left a 5-star review or a positive comment, please do so. And you can go ahead and like and follow us on all of our social media accounts here at Oh No Media. That's Into the Dark, Murder with My Husband, and of course, Rise in Crime. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.